next is someone who actually, as a very young man, intervened in the Harvard Lampoon Castle and renovated it as a child, essentially. Bill Donnell is, among other things, the savior and restorer of a great historic building in Chicago. And he will now talk about this building that none of us, I guess, have been able to avoid talking about. What I guess, and you or someone else can correct me if I'm wrong, is really the last great project that he saw finished in his lifetime, which is to say the Lampoon building on Mount Auburn Street. Bill Donnell.
The Lampoon was edited during its first 3 decades out of rented rooms around Harvard Square. And by the time of its 25th anniversary in 1901, the membership, the graduates, who totaled about 100 at the time, included some of the nation's most prominent writers and artists and architects. Sam Van Dam in his thesis said he thought there were 25 architects among those 100 people. One of them, one of the most prominent in the country, Charles Coolidge, who designed, among other things, the John Carter Brown Library at Brown University, also designed Randolph Hall on the north side of Bow Street here. And his brother was the developer of Randolph Hall and also, with his investors, owner of the little wedge in the middle of the picture. In 1901, at the 25th anniversary party, people talked about the need to find a permanent home for this society, and a committee was formed, and sites were considered in various places in Harvard Square, and at some point this site was determined to be the favorite. There were some complications about acquiring it. But the magazine was sufficiently profitable that it was able to save $5,000 during the 8 years after the 25th anniversary party. And in February of 1909, using that money, it made a down payment, it bought this site, and in May of that year issued a prospectus asking for $30,000 to be represented by bonds to pay for the balance of the cost of developing the site, to the designs of Edmund March Wheelwright. And this was the plan that he prepared and that was presented in the prospectus. Basically very simple, using the whole site to the lot lines on 3 sides, with a basement that was to be used primarily as rental space. On the ground floor at the east end at Plimpton Street, an additional rental space to generate income to pay the mortgage and pay the bonds. And the balance of the castle for use in producing the magazine. And on the ground floor, it included several offices. And on the second floor, the next to the bottom in that layout, mostly one great hall for weekly Thursday night banquets. And ancillary spaces. And then on the top floor, essentially one small room, an eyrie for the Lampoon's artists. This elevation was also presented with the prospectus, showing the overall scheme, which was characterized as a Dutch Renaissance design. And Wheelwright spent the summer, as I think has been mentioned, after the groundbreaking in June of 1909. He spent part of the summer and early fall in Holland acquiring items for the finishes here, including 7,000 Delft tile and many pieces of furniture, some antique building materials, salvage materials. And by February of the following year, 12 months after the site was acquired, the castle was completed, a housewarming party was held, and very shortly thereafter, publicity. There were articles in national architectural magazines writing about the castle in uniformly approving terms. And this is a photograph from one of those articles, which I think shows clearly that the overall scheme was meant to recall the idea of a sphinx with high shoulders, high haunches, face on the left and the arms in front. And the front was, the face of the sphinx was a stuffed shirt with a bow tie and a Prussian helmet. And I think the expression is an expression of shock at the sort of thing that the Lampoon had been created to publish. Wheelwright used these essentially rejected bricks for the castle in order, I think, to convey the idea of the idea that the building was ancient. Ancient buildings get discolored, and the bricks tend to erode. This material actually proved to be very successful for the castle. It's still mostly in very good condition. The interior was published in a couple of these articles, and this is the first room that one would come into, the public room for receiving candidates and advertisers and so on. And in it, an oak cabinet made up from parts that Wheelwright acquired in Europe. And from that room, this is a photograph of the actual materials on that cabinet. And from that room, one went through the narthex in this picture, which, along with the public room, was described in these articles as, was applauded for its simplicity, its spareness. This room was intended, Wheelwright wrote, to recreate the living room of a Dutch fisherman, and the walls are all lined in Delft tile, and the cabinet on the left was originally a bed enclosure, but repurposed here as a bookcase. And this room survives today, and many of its artifacts survive today, augmented by fancy things that were bought in the 1960s with some of the surplus from a successful parody of Playboy magazine. The president's office at the other end of the ground hall, right behind the tower, was built out primarily with materials salvaged from the Iroquois Club, which occupied the site before the castle was built. The floors throughout the castle were given to the Lampoon by Henry Chapman Mercer, who was a leading figure in the American arts and crafts movement and owner of the Moravian Pottery Works in Pennsylvania, which produced tile similar to Dutch tile. This is a view of the stairwell inside the tower, showing more of the 7,000 Delft tile. This recalls the stairs in castles, which for defensive reasons were always made to spiral the other way, so that defenders at the top of the stair could fight off the invaders with their right hand, have the advantage. So this, another of the perversities of the castle, this stair is done the other way. I think Wheelwright started collecting things for this project as an undergraduate. And this is an example of the Dutch vanitas painting genre, which gave the Lampoon its motto, Vanitas. And Wheelwright admired these paintings and other Dutch paintings, including the genre paintings that displayed Dutch interiors. And as Ted mentioned tonight, he was very interested in his ancestry, the early history of Massachusetts. This is a depiction of Anne Hutchinson, who was the chief protagonist in the heresy that Ted mentioned. I doubt that she looked like this, but I'm sure that Wheelwright was familiar with this particular drawing, and that the drawing recalls the character of rooms in the Dutch genre paintings, although it depicts early Massachusetts. But hey, the character of the spaces were similar. So I think this, I think that part of what the Lampoon became reflected Wheelwright's sense of a closeness to this kind of character and history, which is something that he might have done in his own home, except that Mrs. Wheelwright wouldn't permit it. I think he did have an ibis in the entrance to his home, but the home was much more conservative. Around the time that he wrote the history of John Tyler and the other Tylers living on the frontier here, he wrote another piece that was an analysis of the evolution of cathedral plans in Europe. And this particular one interests me because it shows two transepts, as the castle has, and the round end, the apse, in the same relationship that you see in the floor plan of the castle, or think you might see in the floor plan of the castle if you look at it from the outside. And I think this interest in floor plans per se as diagrams probably comes from his training at the École des Beaux-Arts. Wheelwright, after graduating from Harvard, spent a couple of years at MIT and then 2 years in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts before returning to Massachusetts to intern and then begin his own practice. In 1904, he was named to a commission by the committee by the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, which was then planning to build a new building on Huntington Avenue. And he prepared an itinerary of projects to visit in Europe, museums to visit in Europe in order to crib ideas for the new Museum of Fine Arts. And one of the museums that he put in the itinerary, and I thank Sam for finding this out for me in his thesis, was the Museum Plantin Moretus in Antwerp. This is the service entrance to the Museum Plantin Moretus, and it may remind you of an aspect of the castle. This is Christophe Plantin, This was an odd choice of a museum to visit in connection with the MFA, because this was actually the largest printing house in the world in the late 1500s. And it was given to the city of Antwerp in 1876, the year that the Lampoon was founded, to be used as a museum of printing. But I think in this building you'll see all the details and all the character of the Lampoon Castle. So it seems evident to me that in 1904, Mr. Wheelwright was thinking about what the castle might be, even if the site hadn't yet been determined. The reviews that were printed shortly after the castle opened mentioned that it contained ancient printing presses. I think another of the things that he bought on his trip to Holland were things like this. This is a floor in that museum which may remind you of Mercer's tiles at the castle. Near the Museum Plantin Moretus is this small building which I think contains all the massing of the castle, although this happens to be rectangular and it doesn't have the tower at the end. And he might on that trip have visited this space, with, the Ridderzaal, the Knights' Hall, which is the Great Hall of Holland and the Hague. It has wooden arches very similar to those in the castle. And I'm sure he was familiar with this building, which is the Guild Hall of the Butchers in Haarlem. And I think conclusive proof that the Harvard Lampoon building is not actually a parody of Dutch architecture. And I think Wheelwright may have been familiar with this building, which was designed by the Lampoon's first Harry Cobb, who drew in some of the issues during the first couple of years while he was attending the Lawrence Scientific School, which was affiliated with Harvard and eventually merged into Harvard. That Harry Cobb, who I learned tonight is not related to our Harry Cobb, at the age of 21 won a competition to design the Union Club in Chicago. This was the headquarters of a varnish company in Chicago, built about 1890. And that Harry Cobb won his competition at the age of 21, moved to Chicago to execute his design, and stayed there for the next 20 years producing a wide variety of work in different styles. And another proof that the Lampoon Castle was not a parody of Dutch architecture. Lastly, among things that I think went to shape the castle, this is the interior of a church that Wheelwright built in Jamestown, Virginia, essentially in about a year before the castle, completed about a year before he did the castle. This church is on the site of a church that was built in Jamestown early in the 1600s and largely gone by the early 1900s, but he was asked to recreate the church, and happily there was another one from the late 1600s surviving nearby, and he essentially took all the elements of that church and erected them on this site. And I think this may have made him comfortable, certainly experienced with the use of brick as an interior facing material, which the castle has in the Great Hall. This is a picture of the other church, which is in Smithfield, Virginia. And Wheelwright also used the brick detail, the detail of those step gables. This is the only other building I've ever been able to find that has the same detail that the Lampoon has. So This was, I think, among the experiences that he drew on to put together the castle. These are the steps in the castle. Steps on the gable of the castle. So, the other final factor that I think shaped the castle is, of course, its context. It was a very small building to be built in front of much larger, taller buildings, and in order to make it not reduced to insignificance by that background, Wheelwright chose to create or to suggest very strong elements on the exterior. The two transepts actually hardly appear on the plan. You have to look for them. But because of the treatment of the roof and the little setbacks and the treatment of the windows, they read very prominently on the exterior of the building. And they give it, they're large objects that give it a significant upward thrust. This design on the left is of the chimneys. We were fond, Lampoon undergraduates were fond of referring to that as the entrance to Hampton Court. It's actually, that's not what we called it, but it, I think, is lifted, that and the tower and that relationship, from the entrance to Henry VIII's Hampton Court Palace. Kurt asked me to talk a little bit about the library in the castle. After making this surplus from the publication of a parody of Playboy magazine in the summer before my senior year, the editors decided that it was time to build a library. The library, according to a letter that Sam found in the Harvard archives, was something that the trustees intended to build and hoped to build at some point. The letter, I think, was written in 1911 and said that the Lampoon hoped to build a library in the near future. But they never got around to it, and we felt a need, and that building it would be an appropriate use of the funds. And the area that was designated included the narthex, which you saw a picture of, and the business office, which was next to it. Two spaces that were very small, and because they divided the building the way they did, neither was hugely functional. But together they made a nice space. And together it happened that they were about the same width across the building as length from front to back. So one could inscribe a circle in them, and that seemed like a nice idea to repeat the circle of the tower. So we started talking about the possibility of having a round library, and we considered the possibility of building it on a theatrical turntable so that you could press a button and the library could rotate and all the doors and windows would disappear. But like most Lampoon schemes, we've found some problems with that and moved on. And instead just decided to develop the bookcases on various concentric rings so that they could create this circular allusion to the tower in the front of the castle. And at the same time not waste too much space, not feel too enclosed. So the various bookcases are all done on different concentric circles. And One problem with this was that two of the beams that held up the Great Hall, which were 12 inches deep, crossed through this space, and you either had to go under them or figure out some way to do something circular among them, because they didn't make any sense architecturally in the context of the circular scheme. So the solution that we developed was to use just arcs and concentrics to create high spaces, almost as big as we could, but related to the locations, also defined by the location of other things in the room. And that resulted in this design for the ceiling. And this was a little too complicated to sell to the board and the trustees by itself. So I built this model to explain it to them. And in the model, used tissue paper to create the effect of the proposed indirect lighting for the recesses in the ceiling. That's how we did that.